to Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the 80s and to do cross training in counterterrorism. And the American guys in Delta were so focused on being absolutely serious about everything all the time.
Two elite units prepared for the same mission under the same clock. One was wound tight with visible intensity. The other was loose, almost too casual. To outsiders, the contrast felt like carelessness, maybe even disrespect.
Their opinion of us had diminished somewhat. They thought we were stupid. They thought we were incompetent. They thought we weren't very good at our job.
But that's where the misunderstanding began. Because in just 6 seconds, the entire room would learn what real discipline actually looks like. So, let's step into Fort Bragg. A mismatch in the making. Fort Bragg doesn't deal in pleasantries. It's the kind of place where time is sliced into precise increments, and even silence feels tactical. This is where America's most secretive counterterrorism unit, Delta Force, rehearses for the unthinkable. So, when a detachment from the British Special Air Service arrived for joint exercises, expectations were clear. Seriousness was not optional. What followed, however, unsettled everyone. The Americans moved with clipped precision. They spoke in brief, weighty phrases, constantly rechecking their gear, their plans, their tone. By contrast, the SAS, Special Air Service, men entered the space like seasoned actors miscast for a war film. They laughed during downtime. They cracked dry jokes during briefings. Some leaned casually against walls as if the stakes were trivial. To Delta Force, this wasn't just unusual, it bordered on offensive. At the center of this quiet disruption was Robin Horsfall, a former SAS operator who understood better than most how dangerous assumptions could be. He didn't correct the misreadings. He didn't justify the posture. Because within the SAS, discipline wasn't something you performed for the room. It was something you carried in silence, revealed only when the moment truly demanded it. Rituals of readiness. In elite military circles, readiness is both a ritual and a philosophy. For Delta Force, intensity is a visible currency, measured in posture, volume, repetition. It's a system designed to eliminate variables by applying pressure until sharpness becomes reflex. Every drill is treated as if it might erupt into reality. Every motion, every correction, feeds a loop of constant vigilance. The result is an unmistakable rhythm, always alert, always hard-edged. The SAS, on the other hand, operates from a different doctrine, one that mistrusts visible tension. In their world, energy is conserved like ammunition. Jokes aren't distractions, they're pressure valves. Casual posture isn't laziness, it's a refusal to waste adrenaline before it's needed. When an SAS operator leans against a wall or mutters a sarcastic remark before a mission, it's not indifference, it's calibration. To Delta Force, this philosophy looked like heresy. Their operators watched the British with a mixture of confusion and concern. Planning sessions were shorter, questions were fewer. The SAS didn't rehearse with the same outward urgency. It seemed as if they were cutting corners, or worse, relying on reputation. But the British weren't posturing. They were simply obeying a principle too often overlooked. Calm is not the absence of readiness, it is the foundation of it. The tension grew not through confrontation, but through silence. Delta Force operators began to monitor the SAS informally, studying how they moved, who took the lead when things went off script, who stayed quiet when control was slipping. What they saw didn't align with their expectations, and that dissonance only deepened the divide. There was no verbal clash, no accusations, just a widening gap in perception. One side believed intensity was the proof of competence. The other believed the absence of intensity was its final form, the legacy that created the myth. Long before the quiet tension at Fort Bragg, there was a moment that etched the SAS into counterterrorism history, Operation Nimrod. On May 5, 1980, 6 armed men stormed the Iranian embassy in London, taking 26 hostages. For 6 days, the world watched as negotiations dragged and patience wore thin. When the gunmen executed a hostage, the British government gave the order to act. What followed became one of the most iconic Special Forces operations ever televised. Viewers saw masked figures in black explode through windows. fire-controlled bursts, and disappear into smoke. The broadcast lasted mere seconds, but within military circles, something deeper was being analyzed. Unlike cinematic chaos, what experts saw was pure control. There were no shouted commands, no visible panic, just a sequence of rehearsed decisions executed with surgical calm.
Switch it on. And we did that at the Iranian embassy as well. We spent all week watching the bloody snooker on television and playing silly jokes on one.
The real brilliance of Nimrod wasn't in the flash. It was in what no one could see. Weeks of scenario modeling, every corner of the building mapped and memorized, failure dissected in advance. The violence of entry was merely the final note in a symphony of invisible preparation. The SAS didn't gamble. They closed margins. For Delta Force, then still refining its own doctrine, Nimrod became a touchstone. It showed that precision could coexist with pressure, and that composure under public scrutiny was a weapon in itself. But legends are double-edged. The more mythic the operation became, the more it risked being misunderstood. To some, it looked like aggression delivered with flair. To others, like Delta, it hinted at a kind of mastery difficult to replicate. Now, years later at Fort Bragg, that reputation lingered in the background. It shaped expectations and quietly invited scrutiny. Was the SAS still that sharp? Or had Nimrod become an unrepeatable story, too perfect to trust? Water pistols and discipline. The moment that pushed perceptions to the edge didn't come during a mission or briefing, it came during a drill. Inside a simulated kill house, Delta Force operators moved like sculpted machines, eyes fixed, shoulders squared, every step heavy with intention. Then the SAS entered carrying bright blue water pistols.
And we started to get annoyed, so we started playing up and doing the assaults with water pistols instead of us, our flying submachine.
To the Americans, it was absurd. Months of joint planning reduced to what looked like theater. Was this a joke, a protest, mockery in disguise? The contrast was so sharp it almost felt insulting. But to the British, the color of the weapon didn't matter. What mattered was movement, angles, flow, mental rehearsal of paths and clearances without burning adrenaline. The SAS had long believed that tension, if used constantly, dulls more than it sharpens. Joking was not carelessness, it was regulation. Water pistols were not defiance, they were deliberate restraint. Delta Force, trained to treat every drill as potentially real, found the lack of intensity impossible to reconcile. The British didn't defend their choices. They didn't explain their logic. They let the misunderstanding fester. To Robin Horsfall and others like him, that silence was strategic. The more underestimated they were, the more space they had to operate without scrutiny. The Americans, confident in their seriousness, now felt the burden of proving superiority. The British, still loose and unreadable, were waiting. They had nothing to prove until the clock started. 6 seconds. When the final evaluation began, there were no speeches or fanfare, just a simulated hostage crisis, a countdown, and a building waiting to be breached. Observers lined the perimeter, clipboards in hand. Delta Force stood taut and coiled, every muscle braced. The SAS, still joking minutes before, gave no indication that anything had changed. Then the signal dropped. What followed didn't look like movement, it looked like choreography. The SAS flowed through the structure in a single, silent wave. Doors opened and threats were neutralized without hesitation.
We got the hostages out within 6 seconds, and they were like, how the hell can you do this?
There were no shouted commands, no visible strain. Each operator seemed to know exactly where the others would be, not through communication, but through embedded understanding. 6 seconds. That was all it took. From entry to hostage extraction, the entire operation unfolded in less time than it takes to tie a boot. The observers were still adjusting their focus when it was already over. Delta Force operators, trained to recognize precision, stood motionless. Their assumptions evaporated in the span of a breath. Robin Horsfall didn't need to say much after the exercise. The shift was obvious. What had looked like carelessness just moments earlier had crystallized into something else entirely. 6 seconds of absolute precision, no chaos, no wasted motion. And in that silence that followed, the entire room quietly recalibrated its opinion. It wasn't just speed, it was the absence of effort. The British hadn't overpowered the scenario. They had simply erased resistance through timing, silence, and practiced trust. Respect didn't arrive as applause. It settled in the room like dust, quiet, undeniable, permanent. Mind over muscle. What the Americans witnessed that day wasn't just training, it was biology in motion. In 2015, neuroscientists at the University of Nottingham conducted a study on elite British soldiers, including former SAS operators. What they found was striking. During high-stress combat simulations, these individuals showed heightened activity in a specific brain region, the anterior insula. This part of the brain governs interoception, our ability to sense internal bodily states like heartbeat, tension, and stress. But more importantly, it plays a central role in managing emotional responses under pressure. Unlike regular soldiers, the SAS veterans weren't merely calm. They were aware of their stress in real time and could regulate it before it became disruptive. Their bodies reacted to danger, but their brains refused to panic. The very thing that looked like detachment during drills was, in fact, neurological mastery. This quiet control isn't just learned, it's selected for, trained, and reinforced until it becomes a default setting. The jokes, the looseness, the water pistols, none of it was accidental. It was a mindset rooted in biology, fine-tuned through repetition, and shielded by silence. What Delta Force saw in 6 seconds, science would later confirm, the most dangerous men in the room don't look dangerous at all until the moment they act. True discipline doesn't shout, it prepares quietly, then moves with purpose when the moment calls. So, what do you think? Is calm the ultimate form of control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story shifted your perspective, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.